Hey folks, just so you are aware, we wanted to give a trigger warning for rape and sexual assault as we talk about The Curse of the Werewolf from 1961, directed by Terence Fisher.
Hello everyone and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Ben.
And I'm Sarah.
Thank you for listening to us today.
That's quite the voice, Ben.
Is it?
Yes, it's much deeper than usual.
Is it? Oh.
Channeling your inner Oliver Reed?
I think I'm just stuffed up. And so it's either this or like nasal.
Like the teen from The Simpsons?
Or like, you know, just that like kind of stuffed up voice. But if I talk down low like this, I don't sound as stuffed up.
You can talk however you would like to talk.
All right. How are you doing today, Sarah?
Doing all right. As of when we are recording this, it is the day before my official physically back to work. I had one work day working from home. So yeah, it's been a long 6 weeks of recovery. I am both happy to return to work and also not happy about the doing of things.
Sure.
You know, it's always like when you come back from vacation, it's like, yeah, I miss doing the work, but also I don't want to do things.
Yeah. And we were just sort of talking about how you need to relearn what days are.
Yes.
Like what day comes after Sunday?
Yeah, well, for 6 weeks, I haven't had to worry about when things are.
Sure.
How are you doing this morning, besides your sore throat and nasally nose?
I'm all right. I'm looking forward to this week's movie.
Tell us what we are watching.
In this episode of Scream Scene, Sarah, we are watching The Curse of the Werewolf from 1961, directed by Terence Fisher.
I've been looking forward to this one for a very long time. I'm so thrilled we're finally here. I've wanted to see this for a while.
Why are you so excited about it, Sarah?
Well, I do really like werewolves in general. I do have a very soft spot for like the first Wolfman, but also I have a big old crush on Oliver Reed.
Yeah.
You know, something about broody, dark hair, long eyelashes, deep voice, something about that, you know.
Where did you first encounter Oliver Reed?
That's a hard question because he, I think, has done like voice roles that I've heard. The first time that I remember being like, oh, this is a guy named Oliver Reed and I like him is The Three Musketeers from the 70s.
Yeah, he's very
dark and broody.
He's very good as Athos in those movies. I am on record as saying that the 1970s Three Musketeers and Four Musketeers are the only good Musketeers movies. I will brook no argument on that. If you think that the Disney one is the best, that's only because you haven't seen the ones from the 70s.
The ones from the 70s are good. There are still problems, but we're not talking about that movie today, so I won't go into it.
Oliver Reed, very good as Athos in those movies.
And then it was really hard to watch him in that Oliver Twist
Oliver!
movie. Yeah. You have to say it that way because there's a big exclamation point at the end. Because he's like not a good guy.
No.
But every time he's on screen, it's just like heart eyes. And then he does something awful. And by awful, I mean like murderous, domestic violence, like things that are like a little bit of triggers for me. And so it's just like, oh, Oliver, don't. And then he comes on screen like not doing those things. And I'm just like heart eyes. So it's absolutely case in point of girl falls for bad boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He plays Bill Sykes in Oliver. And
he does so very well.
Oh, yeah, totally. That was in a lot of ways the movie that like made him more of a worldwide star rather than just someone who was known in Britain. By the early 1960s, the BBFC, the British Board of Film Censors, was under fire from the press for supposedly being too lenient on films. Now, this is in a time when the production code in America was kind of losing its grip on film content, and the BBFC was criticized for letting films like Psycho, Peeping Tom, or Circus of Horrors play in British theaters at all.
We had things to say about all three of those movies in those past episodes, and it's wild to me that Circus of Horrors is lumped in with those two. But that's fine.
At the time, the secretary of the board of the BBFC was John Trevelyan, who had overseen kind of a liberalization of the board since the resignation of his predecessor, John Nichols, in 1957. Nevertheless, Trevelyan was accused of pigeonholing some films. Basically, there was kind of a sense that although he was, adopting some more liberal attitudes in some ways, he was being stricter in other ways. And the impression was like, oh, this isn't fair. And basically what he was doing was that art films could get away with like pretty much anything. Like if it was like, oh, in service of art, while commercial films were viewed much more strictly.
I think that's a trend that has always been a thing.
I think, this was seen as like unfair by some. For example, Trevelyan had a lot to say about the early James Bond movies, which haven't happened yet, the first ones in 1962, but like to such an extent that like there's a reason the villain in GoldenEye 30 years later is named Trevelyan.
Oh,
like
I didn't even make that connection.
The Bond producers have long memories.
The Broccolis don't forget.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But like, honestly, I don't really find much to complain about with that strategy of censorship because like that's keeping in mind, okay, well, art films are going to show at art house cinemas that are going to get attended to by like students and like other like intellectuals versus like commercial films are going to show in like family friendly cinemas that like people of all ages are going to come to, right?
That's almost just like a little bit of different genres as well and expectations as to the purpose behind consuming that piece of media.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of contextualization is how the province of Alberta classifies films here where Castle Scream Scene is located. And I think that it makes a lot of sense. Like someone getting their head graphically chopped off in a Disney film sort of has a different impact than in a like Rob Zombie movie. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. But regardless, public desire for stricter censorship led to a change in the presidency of the board in 1960, as Baron Herbert Morrison was brought in as the new president following his retirement from electoral politics and his elevation to the peerage. So basically, this guy had been like a labor politician, had at one point maybe been seen as like a potential prime minister, and his political career didn't go that way. Things didn't go well for him. And so he retired from electoral politics, was named a life peer, became a baron, and then got the like presidency of the BBFC as kind of like, here's your new posting kind of thing.
Can you imagine Justin Trudeau leading the CBC? Sorry, that's a side note.
The new president was under pressure to show a tighter hand, and so examples had to be made. And Hammer Studios was in the crosshairs. Now, at the time, Hammer producer Anthony Hines had two scripts on the go. One was called The Rape of Sabina. It was a sort of Spanish Inquisition era film, presumably based on the ancient Roman story, The Rape of the Sabine Women, just judging by the title. But it was set in the Spanish Inquisition. It was all about the evils of the Inquisition, No
one would expect that.
And the other script was The Curse of the Werewolf, based on Guy Endore's novel, The Werewolf of Paris.
Well, it's very interesting to me that they are adapting Guy Endore's novel because it's American. So we've actually covered Guy Endore on the podcast before, back in basically the 40s. And I would say that he's a little bit of...
The 1940s? Or like the episodes?
Oh,
like
no.
Episode 40 to 49?
Like 1940s. Guy Endore is very interesting as a figure because he was working in Hollywood not for show business, like we see a lot of other people, but rather to fund his nonfiction work that included biographies of Voltaire and Alexander Dumas. Guy Endore, he was born in 1901 in Brooklyn, and his family saw a lot of financial ups and a lot of financial downs with his father's investments and attempts to be an inventor. Unfortunately, Guy's mother died when he was 4, and the family was struggling. A little bit later, his father sold an invention, so they had an influx of cash. His father had a dream that his dead wife came to him and said that she wanted all the children to get educated in Europe. So all the kids got sent to Vienna for education until the money ran out. Then they headed back to the US. He earned a bachelor's and master's at Columbia University in the 1920s, both of which he funded himself. And after an unsuccessful attempt to pursue a PhD, he turned to publishing his work. So kind of his first publication is a biography published in 1929 about Casanova. Which, from what I can gather, is likely what was resulting from like whatever work he had done in his master's, just knowing the way academia works. But his first fiction was a novel in 1930 called The Man from Limbo, about a poor student obsessed with wealth.
Yeah.
Which made me think about The Student of Prague. Well, interestingly enough, the German behind The Student of Prague, as well as other German horror stories, Hans Heinz Evers, Guy worked a lot with those works, and specifically Alraune, and translated Alraune to English in 1929. So he has a lot of like deep lore. He has a lot of like connections to like the deep history of like horror.
Yeah, for
I guess
sure.
you could say. In 1933 came the novel that is the inspiration for tonight's movie, The Werewolf of Paris, which is kind of like a historical fiction about a werewolf, but in real life events. Also of that year, he published a biography about Joan of Arc. So you can kind of see he has like a large range of interests. Another notable piece of historical fiction from him came out in 1934 called Babouk, about the Haitian Revolution, which also gives you an idea about what his politics are like. In 1935 is when he started working in Hollywood, and that's really where he came into the podcast in the very beginning. There were several films from 1935 that he had his hands in, including Mark of the Vampire, which was a loose remake of London After Midnight. He did the story treatment for The Raven and helped adapt The Hands of Orlac into Mad Love. Now, in addition to horror, he also worked on things like Rumba from 1935, which was a musical drama story. He did work on The Devil Doll, and then also did movies like Ladies in Distress, Carefree, The Lady from Louisiana, and many more scripts into 1951. Kind of his biggest claim to fame with his film career was with earning a nomination for a Screenwriting Academy Award with 1945's The Story of G.I. Joe, which was very explicitly like anti-war and like realistic, and kind of took away the romanticism about war.
So probably no Cobra Commander in that one.
No Cobra Commander in that one. Throughout his time working with screenplays, he did publish some things like short stories as well as political pamphlets, and had a lot of activism around leftist politics, such as helping turn public opinion around what's called the Sleepy Lagoon case in 1942, which I can go into if you would like me to.
Sure.
So the Sleepy Lagoon case is there was a murder in California, and 17 Mexican teenagers were arrested despite no evidence. And Guy Endore's efforts to turn the public against the case, to be like, there's no evidence. They are like holding up 17 people and they're teens for something they clearly didn't do.
Each one stabbed the victim once, like at the end of Murder on the Orient Express.
So both with like pamphlets and like speaking at like public hearings and going on radio broadcasts, he helped turn the public against the case, resulting in the release of All Teens.
All Teens Everywhere?
All Teens Everywhere. He was a member of the Communist Party, which I think you can also see a trend with like his leftist politics, which means that he was blacklisted by the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, I'm beginning to see why his screenwriting career ended in 1951.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, he was never called to testify by HUAC, but he did say that he was a failure of a human being if he could not be subversive to everything HUAC stood for. So in the 50s, he started publishing his own original fiction, and in the 1960s came turn back to historical fiction with these biographies around Voltaire, Marquis de Sade, and Rousseau. Now, when it comes to Werewolf in Paris, I feel like it's very emblematic of his style with historical fiction, because he always had this push-pull of like what he wants to write about, which is nerd shit, and what people will actually pay him for, which is like not nerd shit, you know, like very commercial, like, oh, you want me to write something for Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire? Okay, here you go. That's not actually where my passion lies. Werewolf in Paris is tying these historical events of the Franco-Prussian War and the Paris Commune with the horrific, grotesque tale of a werewolf surviving through the ages, as well as like talking about the failings of capitalism in France in like the late 1800s and bringing in leftist politics and philosophy with that narrative. A little bit of a, you know, take your medicine with some sugar.
Sure.
The werewolf, his name is Bertrand Kellier, and it follows him as he survives through the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 and the Paris Commune in 1870 to 71. Now, Bertrand, interestingly, is built off of a real-life French sergeant named Francois Bertrand, a.k.a. the Vampire of Montparnasse.
I feel we had a
Yep, the vampire, huh? So this French sergeant was titled this because of his necrophilia and mutilation of corpses.
Gross.
He was caught by the army.
Gross.
And, you know, dealt with. In the novel, Bertrand Caillé is born on Christmas Eve to the teen girl who is a victim of rape from a priest, and from that young age has sadistic tendencies. In fact, he dreams of transforming into a wolf and then wakes up having done like horrible things. So after one particular wolf episode that includes incest and murder, he flees to Paris, where his doctor follows him by tracing cases of mutilation of corpses and murders. Bertrand joins the Franco-Prussian War and ends up falling in love with a waitress named Sophie, who herself is not quite right in the head. She's suicidal, she's masochistic, and this is how they discover that he can stop his wolf transformations by drinking her blood.
Huh.
But she's into it because she's a masochist. Mm-hmm. So he's caught by the army, put onto trial. His doctor comes to testify and be like, hey, look, he's also done all these horrible things, so he should be burned at the stake. And instead they're like, he sounds like maybe he needs to be sent to an asylum instead. So he's in the asylum during the Paris Commune, and ultimately Bertrand commits suicide in this fantasy where he believes that this other patient is Sophie. Throughout their time together, they would like have this like part of their foreplay, you could say, was them pretending to commit suicide with each other.
Okay.
The novel ends with an appendix that details the exhumation of Bertrand's grave, which finds a dog in the coffin who has not decomposed at all.
Weird.
So it's considered a formulative novel for werewolf fiction because prior to this point, there hasn't really been anything written down. There has been, but like I cover more of that in the Werewolf of London episode. But not really anything in the same way that vampires have been written
There isn't
about.
like a classic Dracula style werewolf story.
No, people point to this novel as serving as like the werewolf Dracula, you know?
Gotta love a werewolf story that has like a court martial like in it.
Well, that's the thing. Endore is really using the narrative to discuss failings of the aristocracy and capitalism. And yeah, he's not really all that interested in the werewolf side of it. He's using that to tantalize you into reading more.
It's interesting to see that because this is from like pre-Wolfman, right? It's using older werewolf traditions because, you know, we have to remind folks that like full moon wasn't like a big deal before Wolfman, right? And certain other ideas. And so like here, like Bertrand isn't a werewolf because he got like bit by a werewolf. He's a werewolf because he's like a child of sin born on Christmas Eve or whatever, which is like an old fashioned European superstitious kind of thing.
Yeah, and like a lot of the folklore around werewolfism, lycanthropy, is around like, well, you didn't participate in Easter, like you didn't participate in these like Christian traditions, and so you're going to be turned.
Yeah, that you were sinful in some way.
Yeah, so I feel like Guy Endore can get away with this because so much of werewolf folklore comes from literally oral tradition and like just storytelling over a fire, whereas vampirism has been written down.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about, you know, because the Wolfman codified so much of like the werewolf rules, and this is from an earlier period.
I also think it's interesting that he is using a figure called the Vampire of blah blah blah, but the novel came out in 1933, so maybe it was like, well, we can't say Vampire of Paris because Dracula is such a big thing. But
Maybe.
Then wouldn't you want to capitalize on that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
He just decided to make it a werewolf.
Yeah.
It was better for his story, you know? It's always really interesting when you hear about, you know, like a popular horror novel from 1934, and it's like, yeah, and then they did some incest and this priest like raped this peasant girl, and like the werewolf and his girlfriend like did like suicide play to get into the mood for sex, which for them was mostly about him drinking her blood. Like you're like, wow, like this is a lot, Guy Endore.
So I have no idea what to expect with the 1961 movie. I don't believe Endore actually has anything to do with the making of the movie.
Is he still alive
He
by
is
1961?
still alive. In 1961 is when he publishes his Voltaire biography. But he's not really in Hollywood. He has like a couple things that come out this year and then in like 1969, which was like a TV movie, but not really anything significant.
When did he pass away?
He passed away in early 1970.
Got it. You may recall that I opened this episode talking about how the BBFC was looking for a target to...
Yeah, that really bodes well for something based off of an incestuous, suicidal werewolf.
So, while sets had already been built for the rape of Sabina, the BBFC made it clear that neither The Rape of Sabina nor The Curse of the Werewolf would be given certification if produced as written. Like, the Hammer submitted the scripts and the BBFC was like, neither of these movies are getting made. Or if you make them, they're not showing in the UK. And the Catholic Church promised to make a stink about Rape of Sabina if it was made as well.
But it's adapting a biblical story.
The Rape of the Sabine Women is not a biblical story. It's a story of ancient Rome. Also,
why did I think that?
It's an anti-Spanish, like it's a Spanish Inquisition is the bad guys story.
Sure. Why did I think it was biblical? I blame Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Right. Well, anyways.
Sorry.
No, the Catholic Church promised to make a stink about it. And I don't know how worried they were about the Catholic Church affecting the movie's box office like in England, but in Europe, yeah, absolutely. If the Catholic Church said like Catholics aren't allowed to see this movie or whatever, because it was anti-Spanish Inquisition. So ultimately, Hammer decided to cancel Sabina. They just did not make that movie. And so they revised Curse of the Werewolf to be set in Spain so that they could use the sets that had already been built. Therefore, they removed a lot of the novel's like political themes. Like it's no longer about the Franco-Prussian War, and it doesn't have like the Paris Commune and all that kind of stuff because they've moved the setting to Spain. Other elements of Anthony Hines's script, which was written under the name John Elder, had to be changed as well. For example, the priest who rapes the lead character's mother in the novel is changed into a beggar. And the beggar was originally supposed to be a werewolf as well. But this was seen as like kind of like semi-bestiality by the BBFC. And so that was too much. So he's just a beggar in the finished film. But, you know, with changes made and the story retooled to Spain, production began with Terence Fisher brought aboard to direct. Now, this was not Fisher's immediate follow-up to the last film we saw by him, which was The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll. In the intervening period, he had directed Sword of Sherwood Forest, a Robin Hood picture with Richard Green as Robin and Peter Cushing as the Sheriff of Nottingham. For this film, Fisher would be working with a new cinematographer compared to all of the previous Hammer horror films we've seen from him, as the stalwart Jack Asher, known for his colorful and theatrical lighting, had shot his last horror picture and was replaced by Arthur Grant, who had a comparatively more realistic style. We have seen Grant's cinematography before. He shot The Abominable Snowman, but that was black and white, and this is color. But Arthur Grant will be the standard Hammer horror cinematographer from this point onward. So, bit of a change in like the house style, I guess you could say.
Which might be welcome because the last few Fisher works have not been doing well on the list.
The Curse of the Werewolf marks the first werewolf picture shot in color.
Oh, sweet.
Now, this did put some pressure on makeup artist Roy Ashton, who wanted to create something really cool, really memorable for the first color werewolf movie. And he also wanted to create something more wolf-like than Jack Pierce's famous Wolfman makeup of 20 years earlier, which I have always felt looked more like a boar or something really than a wolf.
Yeah. Yeah, you found that it was too tusky.
Well, and he has like a little like pug nose almost. Now, Ashton was an Australian with an education in art and architecture who had moved to Britain during the Great Depression and had gotten a job with Gaumont British doing hair and makeup on films. We saw him as early as like, I think he did The Man Who Changed His Mind, for instance.
Oh, okay.
But his true love was music. And Ashton attended the Royal Academy of Music, where he trained as a tenor and met his wife, who was also a singer.
That's cute.
In the Second World War, Ashton was drafted and put to work at the Ministry of Supply under Charles Fraser Smith, who made what were called Q devices for the SOE, or Special Operations Executive. The SOE was like the Special Forces, Special Operations division of essentially MI6 during World War II. And these Q devices were originally intended as like concealed weapons that SOE operatives could smuggle in behind enemy lines for operations, or get to prisoners of war so that they could use them to escape, or things of this nature. They were called Q devices because they were named after the Q ships of World War I, which were battleships disguised as freighters.
Is this where Q from James Bond comes from? Because I was also going to ask if he knew Ian Fleming.
So,
sorry.
Like,
did I just completely preempt you?
So, yeah. So, like, Charles Fraser Smith is the basis for Q in James Bond.
Okay.
That's what all of that is based on. Ashton worked for Fraser Smith making concealed weapons like exploding fountain pens and umbrellas which shot poison darts.
Is that real, or is that from James Bond?
No, that's real.
That's real. Okay.
Yeah. After the war. So this guy was Q's assistant.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. During the war. After the war, Ashton devoted himself to music, singing in various opera companies, though he kept his hand in the world of film so as to maintain steady income, right? So like when the opera season was not in swing, he would still work in film makeup and vice versa. Though music was his true passion, by the mid-50s he was making more money as a makeup artist, and while working on Orson Welles' Mr. Arkadin, he turned down an offer to return to the opera and devoted himself full-time to film.
Orson Welles will do that to you.
He became the assistant to Phil Leakey, the senior makeup artist at Hammer, who created the looks for like Quatermass Experiment, X the Unknown, Curse of Frankenstein, Quatermass 2, Abominable Snowman, Catgirl, Horror of Dracula, Revenge of Frankenstein. But Leakey left Hammer after Revenge of Frankenstein because in a cost-cutting measure, the studio got rid of Leakey's retainer.
Oh.
So they were still, going to pay him for each individual job, but they weren't just like paying him to stay on the company payroll, basically, right?
Yeah, to guarantee he'd be available.
Yeah. So Leakey left and Ashton got bumped up to lead makeup artist because of that. Ashton's first horror work as the studio's new lead makeup artist was Hound of the Baskervilles, followed by The Man Who Could Cheat Death, The Mummy, Brides of Dracula, and Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll. Now, when Ashton heard that Hammer would be doing Curse of the Werewolf, he got a copy of the script and spent weeks in preparation, wishing to create a truly superlative look for the monster. In thinking about who on the Hammer payroll could wear his makeup design best, it was Ashton who suggested that a young 22-year-old Oliver Reed be cast in the part because his bone structure was right for the makeup, and, quote, he looked like a wolf when he was angry anyway. Robert Oliver Reed was born in 1938 in Wimbledon. He was the son of sports journalist Peter Reed and nephew of film director Carol Reed, who is most famous for directing The Third Man. His grandfather was the famous actor-manager Sir Herbert Tree, and his grandmother was Tree's mistress, Beatrice Reed, who was the family member Oliver was closest to. She was like the only one who kind of like encouraged him or showed kindness to him. Otherwise, Reed characterized himself as a hellraiser in his youth, bouncing between 14 different schools, causing his father to write him off as lazy and stupid. He took on odd jobs, working as a bouncer, a cab driver, and did his compulsory army service in the medical corps. Reed said that the army helped his antisocial and rebellious tendencies by showing him that everyone is an actor. Everyone is just making it up just as much as he was. Nobody knows what they're doing. Everything's bullshit. That kind of thing. Because he was in kind of the peacetime army and they kept talking to him about the war and like all this stuff. And he was kind of like, this is all pretend. Reed's acting career before Curse of the Werewolf had consisted largely of small, uncredited roles, like the small part that we saw him in Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll. The Curse of the Werewolf was Reed's first significant role of any kind, and it was the lead part. Later in his career, Reed would become almost more famous for his alcoholism and his escapades with Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton and Keith Moon. But in this film, he is a young man. He was still married to his first wife at the time. He's making his first major impression to the film-going public. So a lot of the troubles of his later life, have not quite yet come to pass. I mean, he already had the troubled youth, but you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah. The movie's supporting cast largely consisted of experienced Hammer stalwarts who could be depended on to back Reed up. Yvonne Romaine, an actress primarily renowned for her dark looks and hourglass figure, was cast as Reed's character's mother and shares no screen time with him. But because of her sex appeal, she got put on all the posters, kind of like as if she was the werewolf's victim. Reed's actual love interest is played by Catherine Feller, and we see a lot of other familiar Hammer faces like Richard Wordsworth, who was like the victim in the original Quatermass experiment, and character actors like George Woodbridge, Michael Ripper, and others. Anthony Dawson, best known as the would-be murderer in Dial M for Murder, and later the villainous Professor Dent in Dr. No, appears as another villain here. And actor Warren Mitchell is most famous in the UK for playing Alf Garnett on the sitcom Till Death Do Us Part. Alf Garnett is like a middle-aged, bigoted, like conservative voter. And he is the character who was adapted into Archie Bunker in the US version of Till Death Do Us Part, All in the Family. While Peter Sallis, who was also in the cast here, is best known in the UK as Norman Clegg on the long-running sitcom Last of the Summer Wine, which ran from 1973 to 2010.
1973 to 2010.
265 episodes.
Whoa.
Peter Sallis is best known outside the UK, I think, as the original voice of Wallace from the Wallace and Gromit films.
Okay.
The film's score is notable for being composed by Benjamin Frankel, who developed his own style of 12-tone serialism. And I have no idea what that really means, but my musician friend Serena tells me that it is a modernist style and would be very unusual to use in a film score. So we'll see what that's like.
Thank you, Serena.
Upon completion of filming, The Curse of the Werewolf was submitted to the BBFC, who absolutely shredded it, famously telling Hammer that they could have the film with sex or violence, but not both.
But you need both for horror.
Over 5 minutes of censorship cuts were made, including the elimination of all shots of murder. So like you could have, I'm coming up to you with the gun, and you can have like someone go, while you hear a gunshot in the background, and then you can, whatever, but you can't see the actual murder.
So we're back in the 40s.
There's no shot. All shots of blood were eliminated, and all shots of dead bodies were eliminated. So whether those were like the werewolf's victims or the werewolf's body at the end of the movie, anything to do with death, blood, murder, all cut. The resulting cut was considered a neutered mess. And when it was released on May 1st, 1961, on a double bill with Hammer's Shadow of the Cat, it received middling reviews and was a box office disappointment, leading to Hammer never making another werewolf picture. So, no sequels for this one. In 1992, the BBC finally aired a fully restored print of the original cut before the BBFC got its hands on it, which miraculously survived. I mean, the standard operating procedure back in these days was to like toss out any film that was cut out of a movie like this.
Yeah, but I also get the feeling that, you know, someone might have kept something because the BBFC were being jerks.
Sure.
Like as a final sticking point, like, well, I'm not going to get rid of all of them.
Sure. But regardless, this restored print came out in the 90s, and it is this print that has been released on home video ever since, leading to something of a reappraisal of the film. It's now considered by some people to be one of Hammer's best. So that's the version we're going to be seeing, is the restored version with all the violence put back in. And The Curse of the Werewolf has been released on DVD and Blu-ray in the 8-film Hammer Horror Franchise Collection from Universal Home Video, as it was one of those Hammer films that was released by Universal International in the US.
So I'm going to ask a question here. And I feel like it opens up a potential for like a real big rabbit hole.
Sure.
Because we are trying to track the evolution of the genre, should we not be trying to watch the version that's as close as possible to what was originally released?
Yeah, that is a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It's going to become a bigger one as time goes on and we start getting hit with like director's cuts of movies and stuff. I'm sort of two minds of the subject, right? Because on the one hand, I think that when you're judging a film, it's, I think, best to be seeing the version of the film that the director intended. On the other hand, I think you're right that if you're tracking like the historical evolution of a genre, it makes sense to see the version of the film that people saw at the time. In the case of The Curse of the Werewolf, all home video versions since the 90s have been the restored version. So like we don't really have an option to watch the like butchered version that sucks. We've only got the restored version, so that decision's been kind of like made for us in this case. But it's certainly a question that, like, you know, when we get down the line to later films, is going to become more of a question, I think, that we'll have to figure out.
Yeah, it's tough because like there's no way for us to do this in a vacuum. You know, like there's always going to be something, like even when we watched the 31 Dracula, we watched it with the modern score. And that certainly influenced when we were ranking. Yeah. So we'll just like have it as a consideration, I think, when we rank, but I think we have to take the film on its own merits rather than on the censors.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be probably something that we have to deal with on like a case by case basis. Anyways, we're going to be watching it on that Universal home video release. But there has also been a new standalone Blu-ray release by Scream Factory, which I understand is quite good. And you can also rent the film on YouTube, iTunes, and Amazon.
Well, folks, if you would like to watch along, you can find that rental copy on YouTube on our YouTube playlist. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss the mutton chops of The Curse of the Werewolf. Sorry. I just love his hair. Okay. We will discuss The Curse of the Werewolf from 1961, directed by Terence Fisher.
See you on the other side, everybody.
Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching The Curse of the Werewolf from 1961, directed by Terence Fisher. Ben?
This is a good movie.
It's a good movie.
I think it has some weaknesses.
The first half?
Well, we'll talk about that. But I think overall it's quite good. And I was really impressed by like how scary it was. Honestly, I think it manages to like have some really good scary moments, one of which feels very modern. A lot of what I really liked about this movie, and that's really cool about this movie, so much got cut from it for the theatrical release.
Yeah, I would love to, if you have a list.
Yes, I do.
Oh, beauty. Okay.
Yeah. But we should do the plot synopsis first.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you what got cut.
Okay. The movie, as far as I can tell, takes the novel. I didn't really talk about this with the novel, but it is written like, here's my account of stuff I found, and I'm translating, like that kind of like style. And the film opens with that kind of feeling of a narrator. And he says that, 200 years ago in 18th century Spain, this marquise had a wedding. Now we see all of this happening as well as with the narrator, so make of that as you will. But we see that a beggar goes to the door of the castle. He is mocked and basically treated like a dog. He gets locked in the dungeon, and over the years, he is completely forgotten. The only people he happens to see are the jailer and his mute daughter. And this daughter, she grows up, and as like a 20-year-old, she is propositioned by the Marquise, and she refuses. In case you haven't gotten the picture yet, the Marquise is evil.
Yeah, he's a real piece of shit.
His name is Marquise Sinestro. So...
Sinestro?
Like sinister.
Yeah, like the DC Comics character.
I don't think it's like the DC Comics picture. Because it's like Sinestro.
Right.
Well, maybe that's a bit more Italian than Spanish.
He's Spanish Sinestro.
Yeah, there we go. He propositions her. She, refuses. And so she gets tossed into the dungeon along with that beggar who, by this time, he is very animalistic. And she is raped by him. And then he dies after. Like, the experience, just was too much for him. The girl is released because now the Marquise is like, cool, now you're going to sleep with me, right? And she kills him and then runs off after. And then the narrator says, that's when I found her. And yet we opened with 200 years ago.
This is so sloppy because, yes, as you said, the narration opens with 200 years ago in Spain, and yet it's supposed to be a character in the story who's narrating it. But also, the girl he finds is mute, which means
how does he know this?
Exactly. No way of knowing any of the stuff he just narrated.
Maybe she was literate. Maybe she could write.
Not based on the performance that the actress gives.
Just because we don't see her write.
I'm just saying that Yvonne Romain, who plays the mute girl, seems to think that if a person is dumb, they both cannot speak and are stupid. Anyways, he finds her.
Yes. So that's when we learn that the narrator, his name is Don Alfredo Carleto, and he has a housekeeper named Teresa. They take in the mute girl, care for her, and go through her pregnancy. Because yes, she is pregnant. And it looks like she's going to give birth on Christmas Day, which Teresa says this is a really bad omen because you can't have an unwanted child born on Christmas. That mocks the holy child.
No, I mean, this is a real medieval European superstition, right? This was in traditional folklore, one of the ways you get werewolves, but it is kind of weird. God has this much of an ego that it's how dare you be petty. Born on my birthday? Yeah.
God doesn't have a birthday, Ben. Jesus has a birthday.
Yes.
And yes, they're one and the same, but don't worry about it.
Yeah.
For more information about that, listen to Apocryphals.
Yes.
So this is when Leon is born. The mute woman dies in childbirth.
She's fine. The birth goes fine. She's happy and smiling and holding the baby. And there's no sense that any of this was difficult or a problem. They fully nurse her back to health long before she gives birth. But then after holding the baby for a moment and passing it back to Teresa, she basically just goes and like falls over and dies of plot contrivance. Some real Padme Amidala bullshit up in here.
Listen. George Lucas doesn't know anything about women's health. That's why it's not in the Star Wars universe.
And I guess Anthony Hines didn't either.
So when Leon is around 10, he starts to have these nightmares. And around the same time that the local sheep appear to be attacked by a wolf. And we learn that this all kind of started because the local wolf hunter.
He's like a groundskeeper.
Well, it's like in a town.
Yeah.
His job is to guard the sheep from wolves with a gun at night. Mm-hmm. Anyways, he takes Leon hunting. He shoots a squirrel. Leon's all upset about it, and he's a 10-year-old boy, so he goes to kiss the squirrel better, but some of the blood gets on his lips, and he is telling his dad, Alfredo, about this, and he's like, and I just kind of wanted to keep drinking the blood. Totally normal kid. Because of that taste of blood, that has started these nightmares and wolf sightings. So Alfredo takes Leon to the local priest, and the priest tells Alfredo that Leon is actually possessed by an animal spirit. This sometimes can happen if the human soul is a little weak, as such when Leon was born as like an unwanted child on Christmas Day, and also not really having any blood relations. So the only thing that can help save Leon's human soul, overpower the animal, is love. And it's so cute because Alfredo's like, at this point, just been called Uncle Alfredo. And then from this point onward, Leon calls him Dad or Father. But, that's nice. That's nice, Ben.
They also did like an excellent job of casting a little boy who looks like Oliver Reed.
Yeah, they did a really good job. So Leon grows up. Alfredo treats him as his own son. Teresa, still Aunt Teresa, but basically is the mother figure as well. And these strange wolfish episodes are behind him. Notably, Alfredo never tells him.
Yeah, that's true.
So Leon leaves home to go find work at the local winery, and he happens to fall in love with the owner's daughter, Christina, though she's engaged to some rich guy.
Who owns the winery?
No, her dad owns the winery.
No, the rich guy's dad owns the winery. Her dad just runs it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leon's coworker, Jose, is a bad influence. And also the most British guy you'll find in this movie. On a day off after payday, Leon and Jose go to a brothel. Now, it happens to also be a full moon, and Leon's like not really feeling up for it. He's kind of under the weather, but Jose ribs him enough that Leon's like, fine, I'll go. Basically, Leon's alone with one of the women at the brothel, starts to turn into a werewolf, kills her, and then Jose, who is drunk, kind of wanders around trying to find Leon, and werewolf Leon kills Jose. He, it seems like, manages to run across the countryside back to his home, kills a shepherd along the way. The shepherd deserved it, don't worry. And then gets home and like wakes up in his bed. Alfredo discovers him in the morning because he hears someone having nightmares. And he's like, Leon, what are you doing here? And Leon has blood on his hands and has a little bit of a freak out. And this is when Alfredo says, okay, let me tell you that you're a werewolf. The priest confirms for Leon, and understandably, Leon is very distraught about this. He doesn't know what happened during the night. He has complete amnesia about it, and he is worried because he doesn't know where Jose is. And finally, he gets back to the winery, and he knows it's going to be another full moon, so he's really, really worried about what's going to happen. And then Christina shows up and she's like, hey, boyfriend. And he's like, get away from me. I can't tell you why. She refuses and stays with him through the night. And it's actually her presence, or rather her love, that prevents his own transformation that night. So when they wake up and Leon's like, I didn't turn. okay, cool, let's elope. Like right now, let's pack your bags and just get out of here. But before they can escape, Leon is arrested for Jose's murder. Now, Leon is taken to the jail. He tries to explain, like, you have to let me go because at night something bad's going to happen. The jailer doesn't care. And Leon's like, okay, cool, well, go get my dad then. You need to get my dad. Finally, Alfredo and the priest come, and it essentially seems like they have two options. One, Leon's like, either kill me now, like execute me now, or let me go so I don't go killing people.
Here I go killing again.
On my own. The jailer's like, no, I'm not doing any of that. And so Alfredo and the priest are like, okay, well, maybe if we appeal to the mayor and tell him what's going on, maybe he can step in. Now, Christina, by this point, has discovered where Leon's been taken, races over there, and shows up. And Leon's like, oh, cool. So Christina means that I won't transform. Let her stay. And they're like, no. So it's at this point that Alfredo and the priest are like, okay, we have to go appeal to the mayor. And Leon looks Alfredo dead in the eyes and says, if we can't stop it in time, you need to kill me. Now, the mayor refuses to let Leon go. And so he transforms in the cell. And this is when we actually get to see the transformation. Now, there is also another inmate in this cell, and Leon kills him, escapes and kills the guard, and then is on the run in the town with all of the citizens chasing after him.
Angry mob style.
But Alfredo goes and gets a gun. There's been a silver bullet that's been set up since the beginning of the film, but it didn't seem to make sense to bring it up until now.
Basically, that hunter who got like super shamed by the village because he never
actually caught the wolf.
Right. At one point, he was convinced that the wolf was some sort of supernatural creature. So he melted down his wife's silver crucifix
that had been blessed by the archbishop
into a silver bullet to kill this like mysterious supernatural wolf. He ended up like killing the shepherd's dog, and everyone thought everything was fine because Leon stopped having like the nightmares, but he still had the silver bullet kicking around. So that's what Don Alfredo goes and gets.
He follows Leon up a watchtower, and just as Leon is like about to like he's full animalistic and he's about to like pounce on his dad, and Alfredo shoots him. So Leon dies. There is no post-death transformation scene, and as the mob has been following Leon, Christina and Teresa were following along as well, and the film ends showing Christina and Teresa like crying because it's fully tragic. So that's the film.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I didn't bring up the thing with the silver bullet when Leon was a kid because I was trying to like give a brief synopsis.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, be concise.
But yeah, I would love to hear from you what was specifically cut, because you kind of gave a brief overview in the first half.
Yeah, most of the time what it is it's like shots cut out of scenes. But the servant girl getting raped in the dungeon is cut, which means that her being pregnant doesn't make any sense, and why we followed this like beggar down his descent into animalistic madness also doesn't seem to matter or make sense. The scene where she stabs the Marquess is cut, which means that like it seems like they throw her in the dungeon and then they let her go and then she runs away. Like is kind of how the chain of events seems to occur. The scene where Leon as a werewolf kills the sex worker at the brothel, they cut out like any shots in that scene that had blood in them. And they also cut, there's like a shot that's just like a long pan over like her broken, dead, bleeding body. That's cut. Any shots of dead bodies were cut, whether they be man or beast.
So you don't even see the shot of the dead dog?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
The shot where Alfredo shoots Leon and we see like the gunshot blow a hole in his chest and like the blood fly out the back of him, that's cut. And also the shot of Leon's dead face on the ground.
So anything that would provide any kind of impact.
Right. So like the movie's kind of left not making a lot of sense.
And definitely wouldn't be a good movie nor a good horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
As it stands, I don't think the horror in this movie is pushing boundaries in a way that would have necessitated the BBFC to respond in the way that they did. Like, I'm just thinking about like Peeping Tom and how transgressive that was and the pushback on it. And it was like, I could understand it. I disagree, but I understand where you're coming from. There's nothing in The Curse of the Werewolf that is hitting the same kind of transgressiveness.
Yeah, as I sort of set up in the intro, like what's really happening here is that Curse of the Werewolf is paying the price for Peeping Tom's transgressiveness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I wanted to put it in a context that it's not like The Curse of the Werewolf was like way too much.
Yeah,
It was like within the boundaries of the time.
That said, like, you know, looking at the uncut version, like some of the blood and gore in this is like, whoa, you know, like the shot of Leon getting shot really stands out in my mind is like, holy shit. They just like straight on, like it was a gunshot. You see a hole get blown in his chest. You see blood spurt out the back. Like this isn't like just, oh, some smoke comes out of the barrel and the actor twirls around and falls over. Like, no, this is a gunshot.
Oh yeah. Like it went for things. I also think the murder scene of the sex worker felt very modern.
Yes.
Because we also like don't see anything, but we just see and hear things, and it I don't know, it felt very not 1960s, 1950s horror.
The other shot that felt very modern to me is when he transforms in the jail cell. It's cool. It's kind of like a two-stage transformation. Like at first, just his like face and hair and stuff kind of change. And in fact, the makeup design at that stage actually looks a lot like the makeup from Werewolf of London. Like it feels almost like an homage. And then he transforms like fully. And there's a shot where he like lunges right at the camera. Like
it's good.
He's lunging at the other inmate, and it's basically a POV shot. And that felt super modern to me,
yes.
Right? Like horror movies still do that kind of jump scare, right? But backing up to kind of the start of the movie.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'm unsure if the long origin story is a strength or a weakness.
In what ways is it a strength?
Okay, so like on the one hand, it is a long time to wait to get to Oliver Reed and the werewolf, right?
Yeah, it's like 45 minutes.
Yeah. You know, I see that this is probably something that's coming from the novel. Like in a novel of this style, it's kind of okay for things to have like a long rambling origin story. On the other hand, it's not like the werewolf part of the movie, like the back half of the movie, feels like rushed to me or anything. Like they basically do all the things that you need to do in a werewolf story. Like we've got the unintentional transformation that leads to some tragic deaths that where we don't quite fully see the werewolf, and we've got the like, okay, we're gonna lock you in your room so you can't get out kind of thing, and we've got the like, oh please, like don't keep me here where I'm a danger to people, like kill me instead. Like we've got all of that stuff. We've got like the final rampage where we see the werewolf in all his glory. We've got the tragic death. Like we do all the things. So it's not like by having this big long origin story, we're necessarily like harming the rest of the movie. And I guess the part of the movie that follows the book is actually like most of it up to the aftermath of the night at the brothel. Mm-hmm. In the book, that's the point where Bertrand like flees to Paris and goes and joins the war. And here we just shift to like fairly standard werewolf stuff, you know, angry mob, silver bullet, etc.
Yeah. I find the first half to be a weakness. I don't think it's enough to tank the movie. But it is kind of just like, why are we with this beggar for so long? Why are we like... It also opens with him going to the town square and being like, I can't read this proclamation. Won't you tell me why the bells are ringing? And people are like, no. So then he goes into the bar and people are like, well, can't you guess? Blah, blah, blah. It was like, why are we doing this?
There's a big long scene of the beggar getting humiliated at the wedding dinner. Like, it does go on, right? And it would be even worse if this was the cut version. Because like I said, then it's like, where, why, what? It's definitely something where you almost feel like we're in one movie for a little bit and then another movie for a little bit and then a third movie for a little bit. I think the thing that for me makes that opening section poor is it's got the weakest acting performances in the movie.
Sure.
Like I think most of the performers in this are good. Oliver Reed's very good, and I'll talk about that later, but like most of the performers in this are very good. The beggar's good. He's fine.
Yeah, he's the guy who transforms in Quatermass Experiment.
That's right.
He's really good at looking very haggard.
Yes. But Anthony Dawson, who plays the Marquess, he's like a little cartoonishly evil. And then once he gets older, he has like 2 stages of older, right? Like there's his initial appearance, which is actually like he's just kind of a jerk and he's evil and it's fine. And it's just Anthony Dawson. If you've seen him in other movies, you'll know what it's like. But then they like, you know, have the jailer girl grow up and they do this like old age makeup, and like his wife, who he married at the start of the movie, like dies and he's all alone. And he's meant to be this like decrepit kind of like, you know, nasty old man. And at that point,
at one point, he's like picking at one of his warts.
Yeah. At that point, like Anthony Dawson's performance goes like really cartoonish. Like it's like, oh yes, I'm an evil old man. Like
it's a little ridiculous.
Yeah. And then Yvonne Romaine definitely picked for this role for her physical attributes, which are on full Hammer movie style display. We've got cleavage up to your chin.
I think you want it lower than your chin.
But like, as I sort of alluded to before, like she plays this jailer girl not just as mute, but as if like she was an innocent waif who like never had anything about the world explained to her in any way. And also like as if she's not only mute, but like doesn't understand
people.
Right. Because
like
people...
no one... so she's grown up mute, and at no point did she seem to figure out how to tell people that she can't speak.
Yeah, people keep being like, oh, what's your name? Or like, oh, it's okay, you can talk to me. Like, why don't you say anything? And she just looks at them with like a blank face and kind of like vaguely gestures her hand.
And it's like, oh, are you hungry?
Yeah,
like
because she keeps like vaguely gesturing towards her mouth.
Yeah, It's like, not good.
By like, if you were mute your whole life, like fucking by 20 years old, you would have a good way of telling people that with you'd have figured out a better hand sign. Like you wouldn't be confused at why are people talking to me? Like, yeah, it's bad. So that's kind of the thing that makes that opening section weak for me.
I think if there had been that original version whether it was a priest or a beggar, whatever, but it was still like a werewolf, like then at least you would have gotten a little bit of your fireworks factory in advance. Like you...
It also explained why he gets so hairy
in
the dungeon.
You know, he can't shave.
Yeah,
then.
But like I've never shaved my arms and I'm like 35 and I don't have like a full like sleeve of hair down my arms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the animalistic makeup on him wasn't the best.
Yeah.
But besides the first half, I really liked this movie.
Yeah.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that it gives you everything that you want in a werewolf movie. I was joking with a friend about I was trying to explain how like An American Werewolf in London is probably, in my opinion, the best werewolf movie. And it has spooky, what's going on, mystery, horror in the first third. And then the second third is horny.
Yeah.
And then the third is horror tragedy.
Right.
And it's almost like the second half of Curse of Werewolf kind of speedruns that a bit. In a good way.
Yeah, totally. One thing I did really like about this movie was its take on certain aspects of werewolf lore.
Yeah.
Like, maybe not like the whole, a child of a salt born on Jesus's birthday pisses off God and so is cursed part. That's a little whack if you kind of break it down morally in any way,
Unwanted child born on Christmas, whack.
Yeah, well, just like that God is like, well, you should be cursed for your fucking hubris to be born on my birthday. But I really like the priest's explanation of what a werewolf is. Like, this idea that like there are elemental spirits out there and they are looking to possess human bodies. And if the, body is particularly weak, like at a certain time, like it'll try and get in there and then it ends up like in conflict with a human soul. And that conflict between the wolf spirit and the human soul is like what a werewolf is and why it switches back and forth. And I think that fits really well with this film's like non-transmissible version of lycanthropy. Like, this isn't really about like getting bit or anything. Yeah. And I also really like how they tried to tie this in with the full moon still, because that's become such a key aspect of werewolf lore by this point, even if it's not in Guy Endore's novel. But like, to just sort of say like, oh yeah, like the full moon's when like the realm between the spirit world and the human world is at its thinnest, and so the spirit has more power to take over or whatever. And I also think it's really cool that the transformation is tied to kind of behavior and how much you are indulging your animal instincts versus like your human higher functions. And it's also really cool that they didn't play this as like human equals reason and animal equals emotion. Instead, it's more like, animal equals like lust and hunger versus like human equals like love and companionship, right?
Yeah, I really liked the integration of like almost a Jekyll and Hyde vibe to this. And particularly with like the priest, it almost felt like a spiritual means of explaining id versus ego.
Sure. Yeah, that too. It also really gives the love interest like a true chance to have an impact on the story, even if she quote unquote fails. But like this idea that like, like what he needed to be redeemed was like someone to love him.
Yeah, it hit a bit of that like gothic-y vibes because of it. The actress who plays Christina, her name's Catherine Feller. She's very good. I think she does a very good job, and she doesn't come off as like a naive teen, even though she's kind of playing a naive teen. Like, she truly does care for Leon, and at one point they tell her that he's a werewolf, and she really struggles with it, but she still wants to help.
Yeah. Oliver Reed probably would have made like a great Rochester in like a Jane Eyre adaptation.
I would have really enjoyed seeing that.
So
I'm a normal human person, Ben.
Yeah, I think normal human people have crushes on Oliver Reed, Sarah.
For context, because this is an audio medium, when Ben suggested Rochester, I definitely like smiled very widely and blushed a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah was having fun watching like 22-year-old Oliver Reed get shirtless in this movie.
This has nothing to do with whether this is a good movie or a good horror movie.
Okay.
Men should have fucking hair. Like, it's what we've established. It's 18th century Spain or whatever. Like, why would they be shaving their chest and their arms? And yes, I understand that it's to create a dichotomy between, or like a visual difference between Leon, who is a person, and then Harry Wolf. But when he transforms and we see it, he just gets patchy in the middle part of the transformation. It's not like suddenly he's like Gaston on the chest. It's just like these patches of fur. And then when he's fully transformed, it's almost like he's wearing kind of like a fursuit kind of element to it. It's like, okay, that's not just a hairy chest, that's fur. Which I think like that transition from like bare chest to hair chest, fine, cool. But the middle, the thing is, Ben, werewolf movies need to be horny. And patches of fur glued onto Reed's chest doesn't do it.
I will say, so the reason he's like shaved chest, shaved arms, I mean, part of it is maybe establishing that contrast. The other part of it is like that was also just like
the fashion of the time.
Yeah, like that's almost like the beauty standard for men of the time. Like if you watch a lot of movies around this time, like very famously, that's like William Shatner on original Star Trek has the bare chest and stuff like that. Although,
yeah, and they were wrong then too.
Although, well, obviously because they let Spock have a hairy chest and Spock got more fan mail. But also like Sean Connery has a hairy chest in the Bond movies. Like
yes,
they didn't make him shave. But also like they probably can't have fully like shaved chest, hairy chest werewolf because like the amount of time production would have needed to like go for Reed to like grow in like a real hairy chest.
Yeah, no, you just like let him have his chest.
I guess
and film that
you
first.
Don't have to shoot in chronological order.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah. Anyways, it's fine. It's like very much a nitpicky Sarah thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Oliver Reed is like fantastic for this part. I did have a few moments of like thinking about, because they bring in like that Jekyll and Hyde tie a bit more explicitly. Like I think it's always there, but because Stevenson wrote Jekyll and Hyde to be about alcoholism, and then knowing where Oliver Reed's story goes past this point and thinking like, oh, he's like a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 22-year-old who's still married to his first wife. You have the world is your oyster, and it's not going to go well for you.
Yeah, I mean, Reed does a really good job here, particularly in the scenes where he's like wrestling with the beast within. And it's possible that, like Lon Chaney Jr. before him, some of his personal demons aided in this performance, right? But the fact remains that it's a good performance, and he looks damn good in the movie. At first, I wondered why not give the werewolf dark hair like Reed.
Yeah, that's fair, because when he transforms, it's almost like ashy.
Yeah, but then I realized with the design that they went with, that probably would have looked more like an ape than a wolf when he's like running around all hairy. It is also, I think, really cool that he doesn't transform back upon death. I don't really know what that says story-wise, but it was just like
I can tell you.
It's a neat difference because it's such a trope, right?
The animal soul won.
Right.
Leon's soul is gone.
Yeah.
So it's like more tragic.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what werewolf movies need.
The blood and gore makeup in this movie is really cool. I can see why the BBFC wanted cuts. I've talked about the shot where he gets shot in the chest before. That felt really boundary pushing. The werewolf makeup itself is really cool. I called out like the neatness of like how there's multiple steps to it as well. They do the crossfade trick with the hands. It's done really well.
It's really good. Yeah.
Like, it really looks good. Like it's like I was super impressed with the transitions and the transformations. I do think it's interesting that we, even though this isn't officially based on Wolfman, it does, diverge from the novel quite a bit at a certain point, even beyond the Spanishness. And once it diverges, like we do come back to that Wolfman element where it's the father who has to be the one to kill the son, right?
Yeah.
Like that was part of the original Wolfman story as well.
Yeah, But I think it works even better here because he loves his son.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so well done. And I think the actor who plays Alfredo, Clifford Evans, he does a really good job.
Mm-hmm.
I think, everyone in the second half is doing a really fantastic job acting. And honestly, my MVP goes out to Clifford Evans and Catherine Feller and Oliver Reed. But yeah.
There's a lot going on here to like sink your teeth into,
Hey.
no pun intended. You got themes of generational trauma, right? And repressed anger, which are really interesting. That's kind of what the whole first half is trying to thematically give you, right? Is this idea of generational trauma and, the sins that are passed on and this kind of thing. And the repression that Oliver Reed's character has.
Yeah, but I also like that it's not like, I think you kind of pointed this out earlier, but it's not like evil versus good in the sense of like feeling any kind of emotion. Even like lust isn't necessarily innately bad. Like, yes, Jose isn't the best influence, but he also didn't deserve to die, right?
Yeah. I think it's actually really important that we get that shot of like the dead sex worker
Yes.
and all the blood, because showing the brutality of it, I think helps sell the tragedy of like why Leon has to be put down, as it were, right? Like it helps sell like this guy can't be allowed to live, essentially, right? Like the danger of what happens when he gets out of hand is just like, it's too much, right? And as much as it's established, like, yeah, if he has Christina with him, like he'll be fine.
It's like a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
In a hopeless world.
Yeah.
Speaking of the world, so this is like in color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they did a really good job making things still be full of mood and atmosphere. Things are still dark, which feels notable because there was one, I believe it was Hammer, but I don't think it was Fisher who directed it, but it was a color movie and it was set in like a jail, and it was like, big, full Technicolor, and everything was lit so flatly.
Yeah. That wasn't Hammer. That was a different company trying to like copy Hammer. It was a Jimmy Sangster script.
That's
right?
it.
So they had pulled in a Hammer person to do it. I don't remember the name of that movie right now. It's one of those movies that has like a title that doesn't accurately reflect the content of the movie, but
and yeah, I just remember being like disappointed with how flat everything was versus Curse of the Werewolf, where you feel like there's a lot of depth. You feel the shadow, even the night scenes. Like obviously there's day for night.
Yeah.
But it felt like maybe it's because of the different process of color, Eastman versus Technicolor, but like it just felt like there was more depth to every scene.
I think what helps is like they have that like village backlot set, and they were able to light that well enough that they could do. They were clearly like using studio lights to light it well enough that they could do night shots with the whole ending sequence with the mob chasing him around the rooftops of the village, right?
Yeah. Another modern thing about this movie that you brought up in the first half was the music.
Right.
And I really liked it. It felt like when they were trying to build tension, the music was doing these really interesting stabs of chords, and it didn't feel like, Psycho with the wee. It just felt like punctuating the tension. It just felt very unique and a welcome change with a lot of the horror movies we've been seeing having more of a jazzy score.
Yeah, sure. I don't know enough about music to really understand what's so modernistic about this score. I understand like vaguely that like 12-tone serialism is supposed to be like a compositional style where you like divide like notes or the scale or something into 12 tones, and then you don't use any one tone any more than any other. like you're supposed to kind of use all of them equally in the composition or something like that. I'm probably explaining this extremely poorly, but like it didn't feel like it's not like, like if you listen to like Lalo Schifrin's score for like THX 1138, where it's like, oh wow, this is like super modern and full of just like mood and tone and not really like melody. Like this still feels like a traditional orchestral score, but it is very good, I think. And I think it manages to support the movie very well.
So I think we're ready to move on to ranking. I will say for me, this movie does suffer because of that first half. I think it brought down the range I was considering. But I do just want to emphasize that you should see this movie. It's everything you want in a werewolf movie. And if you want to skip the first half because you don't need a lot of that, like you can have that stuff explained to you later. Sorry, it's a story structural issue that I will just move on from. If you want to just start at halfway through when Oliver Reed shows up, it's a flat 45 minutes.
You can probably start it when like 10-year-old Leon is there. Like once the kid's in it, that's probably the best place to start. All right, Sarah, who wants to go first?
Well, I will give us some waypoints. The top 2 werewolf movies on the list are 1941's The Wolfman, ranked at number 35, and 1957's I Was a Teenage Werewolf, affectionately called Teen Wolf, ranked at number 76.
So I'm looking above both of those.
Good. Whew. Great. I was worried how things are going to go. Okay, so I don't think it needs explanation for why Curse of the Werewolf goes above Teen Wolf. Why do you think it goes above Wolfman?
Honestly, like Wolfman's really good. It has a lot of good atmosphere, a lot of good build up. It's got that like metaphorical angle with like Kurt Siodmak wanting it to be about like Nazi Germany and stuff like that. That really helps support it. On the other hand, I feel like one of the big things about werewolves as a movie monster is that they're about like exploring like the negative side of like humanity, and they're about like exploring like repressed rage and like violence and like these animalistic tendencies coming to the surface and exploding. And as much as like Lon Chaney Jr. really taps into the tragedy of Larry Talbot very well, although in that first movie he's actually a huge jerk.
Yeah, but the movie plays it like it's a lovable jerk.
Sure.
Right? Like, just to put context around, like, how they're intending him to be.
Oliver Reed really plays that, like, repression really well. And he also comes off as, like, almost like an innocent who has been done in by fate, right? Mm-hmm. He's not, like, a jerk who gets his comeuppance or something like that. Like, he's this innocent boy, this poor lad.
He wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was like curse from birth.
Right. And also, as iconic as the Wolfman is, and I understand like the technical reasons behind it, but like the makeup where like his shirt's fully buttoned up. Like his clothes don't like rip or tear or nothing. Like he's just walking around, like essentially just with like a Halloween mask and gloves on. Like I know that it's better than that, but like it doesn't speak to that feeling of like this unstoppable thing coming ripping out of you when like we can't show blood, we can't show death, we can't show all of these things. And so here I think we tap into what the power of a werewolf is a lot better when we can show like his shirt rip up and like he gets covered in hair and he has big claws and he tears through people and there's blood and guts everywhere. Like I think it's, and then the tragedy stuff gets played just as well. Like, it's still his dad has to kill him and all that kind of stuff, you know? So I just feel like it's a lot stronger as a werewolf movie overall.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Like, I feel like if you want to say, well, Wolfman's iconic, sure, but it's even iconic to the point where, like, you can see some influences in this movie, but this is like a refined version of it that takes it to the next level.
Yeah, and like, you know, at the end of the day, like, Nosferatu is iconic and it's down at like 44. Like, we're not ranking things solely by like, ooh, I recognize that thing, you know?
I got that reference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's worth having a discussion. It's also interesting to think about since Wolfman, and you could even argue since the 31 Jekyll and Hyde, the theme of person transforms because of an inside overwhelming emotion is a very, 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 very common theme on at least like a good third of all the movies on this list, probably more. And this is so well done in how it handles the like tragedy of like not knowing that that's even in you.
Right. And it also does like a really interesting job of kind of explaining like it makes sense why a silver bullet kills him. It's not just that it's silver, it's like silver from like this melted down crucifix. And like the priest gives such a good explanation for like why this all works the way it does. And it works thematically and all these other things.
Yeah.
So my range, I was looking at like what's our highest Hammer film, and it's Horror of Dracula at number 8. And I think you're right that like the first half where we're getting the long-winded origin story does like drag this down. And so it's not like as strong overall as stuff like I Walked with a Zombie or Fall of the House of Usher or Tokaido Yatsuya Kaiden. But another movie that's really good but also has like a long way to go before you get to the good stuff is Jigoku. Where we go into like hell and there's all that cool stuff, but like that stuff's like the last third of the movie, and we have to get this extremely long story about why all of these people deserved to go to hell before we can get there, right? And so I don't think this is better than Tokaido Yatsuya Kaiden. I think it might be better than Jigoku. It might not be. So the top of my range here is 13.
Okay.
And then looking down from there, you know, we have some really good titles. Island of Lost Souls, The Invisible Man, Dorian Gray, Isle of the Dead. These are really strong pictures. Black Sunday. I do think this is definitely better than the first Quatermass Experiment, which is like a good, moody little sci-fi horror film. But I think Curse of the Werewolf is doing way cooler stuff. And that puts this above Dracula, that puts this above Frankenstein, and I'm totally like fine with that. It's above Le Diabolique. I think that's totally fine. So that's my range. It's 13 to 24.
Cool. My range is in your range.
Oh, neat.
So I'm with you about Quatermass and Le Diabolique.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, I was like, Le Diabolique pulls the like, aha, I stopped you just in time. Oops, she's dead kind of thing at the end, which undercuts a lot of things. And I felt like Curse of the Werewolf isn't pulling any of its punches. The BBFC pulled its punches, but that's it.
Sure.
So 25 is my floor. And as I was thinking about the way that this movie handles color and the reddest paint you could ever fucking find.
Yeah, for sure. This is some R255 blood right here.
Like, I think the red number 6 food dye just got banned in the States. Like, this paint wouldn't be allowed in the States now.
Right, yeah.
Like, it's so pure red. I was thinking about another movie that uses color to really emphasize things, and my eyes fell to The Picture of Dorian Gray at 18.
Sure.
And I think Dorian Gray does a better job about having that discussion around what's going on internally and what does it mean to be a bad person, and then having the reveal of that hideous, grotesque portrait in color is so well done. It feels like a level of cohesive storytelling that is a step above what Curse of the Werewolf has put together.
That's fair.
So my range is 18 to 25.
So here's the spot I'm looking at then. Yeah. Above City of the Dead, which is currently at 20, and is like a really fun little like proto Wicker Man kind of movie. And below Isle of the Dead at number 19, which manages to like really hit like a spooky ghost movie atmosphere so well, right? Like Isle of the Dead is a campfire story that like really sticks with you. You know what I mean?
Yes. I still have the scream from that woman in the coffin in my head. And that was episode 133.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable with this spot. I think this makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so entering the list at the new number 20 is The Curse of the Werewolf, starring Oliver Reed, directed by Terence Fisher from 1961.
You know, one thing I didn't mention, because I forgot about it, I was about to say, Terence Fisher, you're on the up and up, because the last few Fisher films have not been good. And this one changed cinematographer.
Yes.
And I think that's for its benefit.
Interesting.
Like I'm thinking about the Two Faces of Jekyll. And yes, that has some interesting parts of it. But if you're just thinking about the way that it's shot, that film has a similar flat feeling with the color versus the depth that I found in Werewolf.
Cool. Well, let's see if that, cinematographic style holds up, as this guy is going to be our chief Hammer cinematographer going forward.
Sweet. Well, folks, if you would like to see the list that we've just talked about, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to the many episodes that we have mentioned today, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest this or any other ranking, you can drop us a line through our Ask box on Tumblr. You can reach out over email at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on Blue Sky at screamscene.bsky.social and talk to us there.
Scream Scene updates every other Wednesday on SoundCloud, Spotify, and a bunch of other podcasting apps. If you want to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to our RSS feed. And if you'd like to support the show, you can head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Scream Scene Podcast, where you can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Patrons at the $5 and $10 levels get access to bonus content that we've done over the years. And Sarah just put out a review of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, which we both went and saw. And I might put out like a contrasting review. I don't know. I also had thoughts.
Overall, it was fine. Did you hear Eggers' next movie is going to be a werewolf movie?
Yes, werewolf.
Yeah, from the 13th century.
Yep.
I think this will be much better because he's not trying to adapt something.
That's fair.
Not adapt, I guess, technically.
I really liked Nosferatu. Well, anyways, go to the Patreon if you want to find out more about what we thought about it. That's patreon.com/Scream Scene Podcast.
So, Ben, what are we watching next week?
Next week, we're watching the B movie to this film. It's a Hammer horror film called Shadow of the Cat.
Ooh.
That is about a cat who witnesses its owner's murder and then is chased down by the murderers because it's the only witness.
Amazing.
Because you know how cats can give testimony in court.
Yeah,
at least in England.
I'm getting some Edgar Allan Poe vibes.
Or
what was that called? Like the Black Cat?
The Black Cat, or like...
I'm also thinking about That Darn Cat.
That Darn Cat, yeah. Very That Darn Cat. But apparently this is horror and not screwball comedy, so...
Oh, good. I hope this means I get to talk about That Darn Cat.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.